Nice Radio's Kalulu presents Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative and yes, certainly controversial socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard on Nice Radio on Saturdays at 6 p.m. with repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can always catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info. You can also check us out on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course, Keith Joseph. Today, dear friends, is Saturday. It is the 15th day of March 2025. Welcome to another edition of your favorite program, Just Another Look. Yesterday, March 14th, the nation observed National Heroes Day. National Heroes Day. And it has been the occasion in recent years. The Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, delivered a presentation at the obelisk. Of course, much like independence, there was much that was political, but he attempted to recount the history of how we arrived at where we are today. And that historical perspective was not without the occasional commentary about different aspects of the politics of the democratic candidates. And so there was a sense in which some of those listening may well have pondered the real intent of his sermonizing at the obelisk. Because in many respects it was sermonizing, as is the case with many of his speeches. It is the knowledgeable one, the quote-unquote intelligent one, the bright one, exposing, perhaps to his own delight more than anything else, his seeming brilliance. But there are some times when one gets the impression that Gonsalves really cannot help himself, and that ultimately the politics has to, at some point, take center stage. And so the National Heroes Day 2025 fit the bill. Because above all else, this is an election year. And what we have witnessed is that every opportunity has been taken by members of the ruling regime, but particularly by Gonsalves himself, to dig deep and to try to find ways of impressing the electorate that there should still be some popular support for the ruling party. after 20, 25 years. So as you listened to the presentation, one recognized that there was a sort of finality about the presentation. A kind of suggesting, but this may well be the last time that I'm doing this. So let me tell you how much I know about it. But there were so many contradictory omens that emerged out of yesterday's presentation that one came away thinking that in many respects, Gonzalez is a spent political force. And that he may well be himself concerned about some of the quote-unquote intellectual challenges with which he's confronted at the present time. Because the National Heroes Day excessively long presentation on his part delivered mixed messages, so that one couldn't quite understand why everybody else was duly recognized for who they were in terms of the Kalinagos and the Garifuna, and even the British colonials. But when it came to Africans, we were talking about African bodies. The number of African bodies that were transported here as slaves. African bodies. Time and time again throughout the presentation, the Africans were, for the most part, considered mere bodies. But it is perhaps because Gonzalez has reached that stage in his life where he does not see, understand, appreciate exactly what kind of impression he wishes to give when he uses particular terms. Because the Africans who were brought here as slaves, or to be slaves, were human beings just like everybody else. They were not just bodies, they were human beings, treated most despicably by the perpetrators of the slave trade. And so one has to understand the politics of Gonzalez and the intent of his messaging in order for one to determine the level of support you wish to give to that kind of thinking and phrasing and presentation. There's a tendency for us to gloss over some of these things. And there's also a tendency for those who perpetrate those ideas as a way of identifying individuals and understand why it is that in 2025 that is the concept you want to utilize in a presentation on an occasion like this. But one also has to understand that National Heroes Day does not hold much significance for many Vincentians. Because for as long as we've been observing it, It took us a while before our own historians had to correct the British historians who suggested that Châteauneuf died in a sword fight. But it's not even sure if he died on Dorchester Hill. So the historians are reconfiguring and rewriting our history from our perspective. But sometimes it's hard for us to understand why that has become necessary. And also why we must not accept any half-baked historical analysis that is not appropriately rooted in our understanding of our peoples. Because that requires a clear definition of the peoples who were involved. Before, during, and after Châteauneuf's life. How we define those people remains an important part of our understanding of our history. But we've always been told that we need to be mindful of who is writing that history, who is speaking that history, who is telling that story. Because in every instance, it is underpinned by their values and their value system. Communication is value laden. That is part and parcel of our reality. It is value laden. Some years ago, the current administration attempted to suggest that it was committed to the development of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that each month was going to be designated to something, an aspect of Vincentian life, Vincentian culture, Vincentian history, so that we can better understand ourselves and develop ourselves. We started talking about National Heritage Month, Black History Month, Emancipation Month. And all of that has proven to be just fanciful old talk. Political mamagism. And you notice that each time that the elections are coming around, we find ways of trying to revive some sense of who we are as a people and how we came to be. And you wonder why that is not the case all of the time, every year. But the politics of the ruling regime is such that it has to maintain a kind of dominance, of being the ones to set the pace. And many of us pay little attention to the fact that there's a picking up of the pace and a kind of giddiness that comes with that, to appear to be building St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the election year more than ever before in its history. And you can go back and check each year after the initial victory how that has been the reality. So the ruling regime is seeking to access a sixth consecutive term. And suddenly, National Heroes Day becomes important because we need a major speech this time because we lost the popular vote in the last elections. So we need to convince the successive generations of the Garifuna, who for the most part we have ignored. And we choose in the presentation to ignore the fact that Adam Eustace, in his brief tenure as Prime Minister, talked about giving citizenship to the Garifuna. The same Garifuna that Gonzalez was talking so much about from his obelisk pulpit yesterday. The same Garifuna. So when Eustace was talking about giving citizenship, which will allow them to own land or invest in the country of their origin, what did the opposition then say? And for all the love of the Garifuna that we heard being exalted yesterday, the matter of their citizenship was not important. You remember that the opposition at the time that Eustace talked about building relationships with the Garifuna, even when he was in opposition. The response from those who now control the levers of political power in this country was to warn Vincentians that the Garifuna that Eustace was talking about would probably be coming back and taking your property. Remember that? We cannot afford to have short memories in the political season. We must remember the responsiveness to an offer to our heritage, our Garifuna, to return home and help build our country. And the concern by others in the political realm were they coming to take your property. So one is not sure if the recounting of the Garifuna's history yesterday was an attempt to whitewash the history of the ruling political party's posture when Eustace, a black man, was talking about having Garifuna return home and contribute in a meaningful way to the development of their motherland. One has to be consistent. One has to listen and understand the political shenanigans and the political mamagism and the political opportunism of our politicians. So it was all right to suddenly glorify the Garifuna yesterday, to at best characterize the black population here, the descendants of slaves, as descendants of African bodies, not personages. Understand the thinking behind such pronouncements. Was it intended to be uplifting or degrading? One has to understand these speeches. It was found necessary, it seemed, to essentially berate the Vincentian electorate for having rejected a constitution which by their right they could have accepted or rejected. But it seems it's a burning issue. It pains me, he says, to be talking about the Baliso in the act to take the land. Pains me to be talking about it being reposed in the crown. When you are offered an opportunity to change and put a president in place, they rejected me. Of course they did. Because James Mitchell and others were able very easily, very quickly, to recognize what was being done and the political consequences of that proposed new constitution. Don't take out certain pieces now because it pleases you on particular occasions to identify what aspects of it hurt you. But Gonzalez was present in the parliament. And Julian Francis told the representatives of civil society, you see that section in that proposed constitution that you all have there? This is during the interim presentation of the interim report. Don't bother with that because I know how all of you vote. How is it coming? I know how all of you vote. And don't try to get into parliament through no shortcut, no back door. Do like me and go and face the polls. Because he had had the experience of going to the polls and lost. The youth representatives of the Constitution Review Commission, after panel they had submitted a report that says, hello, not one of our ideas found its way in the final document. Not one idea coming from the youth representatives found its way in the Constitution. But here's the Prime Minister, upset because clearly what he wanted and what was satisfactory to him in the final document was not passed by the population. He, of all people, should recall that the referendum on the new constitution was also a referendum on his governance. And there are many who believe to this day that had that constitution been passed, we'd have had elections in short order. But he lost. 60% voted against. 60%. And he recognized the humiliation that he got and the total rejection of a constitution that the electorate of this country, which was prepared to vote the ULP in office, was not prepared to accept what the ULP was presenting as a proposed new constitution. So now that he's exposed himself in terms of reminding the nation on National Heroes Day that they rejected his proposal to break with the crown. That is not all they rejected in the Constitution, my friend. And you are aware of it. That is not all they rejected. They rejected much more than that. because they saw within the new constitution the type of mandate that the organization putting on the table where they wanted to head. And that is what they rejected. They rejected the total package. But if the Prime Minister, as he's seeming to suggest, wanted us to be so independent and autonomous, why has he continued the tradition of putting the monarchs awards and giving them to Vincentians? Nothing in the current constitution prevents you from having a system of national awards. But you have continued to recommend Vincentians to receive the Monarchs Awards. So if you so much wanted to break with the crown, why have you continued to allow our people who you identify as having made significant contributions to the development of this country, being proposed for the Monarchs Awards? That is a clear contradiction. It's a clear contradiction. And if our people put on their critical thinking hats, they will come to an ready understanding as to why that has been maintained. And people have to ask themselves, is it that you're waiting to see who will reject your nomination for Her Majesty's Award after you talk so much about being independent? The contradictions of talking about not doing this and not wanting to have the crown and not wanting that, then why you went to the people wedding? Why you keep allowing ourselves not the wedding, the inauguration or some other such thing? My bad. But there has not been evidence of a significant desire to move in a direction that, for example, others around us were able to do. But there is so much of individualistic leadership as opposed to a cohesive approach that it is not possible really for us to expect any national initiative proposed by Gonzales to be readily adopted by the nation. Because people appear to remain concerned as to which direction he really wants to go. He spoke readily about the history of Châteauguay and others. But one has to wonder about his own political history. It is interesting to see members of the once dominant movement of the UPM and ask themselves, and some of its leaders at the time, what was the real reason that Gonzales left that organization? What was the real reason? And the fact of the matter is some of them may be ashamed to discuss that reason today because they're at a point where they never thought they would have been in their lives. Lying prostrate before Papa. Lying prostrate before the same individual who they perceived or may have perceived as having walked out on them. People may recall as it played out in the Vincentian newspaper for several weeks. The banter between head of the UPM at the time, now Justice Adrian Saunders, was head of the UPM. When Mike Brown switched sides and moved also from the UPM and went to join Ralph in his movement for national unity, seeking to move forward. Join the grouping. Not much is said in public about Blazer Williams and his movement away from the movement for national unity. Something that was discussed at the grassroots level in this country because people always saw Blazer Williams as grassroots. And they accepted his commitment to the development of this country's culture. But when he made the transition to move out, people were asking questions as to why. Why? At the time, he was the one people saw as responsible for the economics. Ralph did political economy, not economics, not finance. You see, you can't just take Heroes Day to try to make a discourse of sorts with regard to the politics of this country and throw in the pieces that seem convenient to you for the public to listen to, without giving, as you yourself would say, a fulsome explanation as to realities of your own political shenanigans. People have to sit down and look at this. And many of those who are part of the rough and tumble of politics that you so often talk about, they were on the front lines. You didn't get beaten. You didn't get beaten for anything, you know. You didn't get beaten for anything, comrade. The people who got beaten today and alive today have a better understanding of the rough and tumble of Vincentian politics that they were part of. That is why some of them have maintained their independence and autonomy from you and any organization that you are part of. And others, sadly, are prepared to lie prostrate because piece of loaf of any size is better than no loaf at all. And they know who they are. And the nation knows who they are. And so they are so clutched at straws that when the opportunity appeared on the horizon in 2000, April, May 2000, suddenly they rallied themselves together and established the Organization in Defense of Democracy, the odd thing, as we labeled it, because we knew it was an odd thing. It remained an odd thing. And while they enunciated a position that organization was there to stay, they didn't look around and realize that there was nobody standing up with them. They were riding on the backs of those who took to the streets for their cause. And they recognized that the odd thing was not really something new, but warmed over ideas of an organization that had long been rejected by the electorate of this country. And some are saying to them, if you played your cards right, you might have been on what they perceive to be the right side of history, because some business interests intervened. Business interests intervened and helped create what is today the Unity Labour Party. When they brought together a 3% party, Movement for National Unity, that couldn't gather a slate strong enough to get more than 3% in the polls. And they end up today with the leadership of the Labour Party by bringing Labour Party and subsuming it under Unity. So it's the Unity, the 3% party, then the Labour, which was the 43% party. Unity Labour Party. Labour has no voice really within that organization. And those who were strong representatives of the Labour Party have all been marginalized. So many were not surprised with the political diatribe on our acquisition of Baliso because it's political diatribe. Remember, we got similar political diatribe when we were acquiring lands in Argyle to put on an international airport. We got the same sort of political diatribe when we acquired the lands of the farmers in Penistone in order to provide more lands for Sandals. On each occasion, we are reminded of the power of government to take whatever property it deems in the collective best interests of the nation. But it seems in the presentation yesterday, in an election year, of more concern to put it within the context of nationalism, of the importance of Baliso to the cause of the Garifuna peoples and their heroic struggle against the colonials. That was the importance yesterday, trying to stir up that nationalistic spirit. An apparent desire to make the link that he and his party may appear to the electorate to be more nationalistic than any other in this nation's history. But if you apply your critical thinking skill, you will understand why that has suddenly become important. for all the 20 odd years. Now we take the property. Now we want the support of the public in us making Baliso the shrine and locate it in our political history to rally the peoples of this country together. Note the politicking that has been taking place. This is just another notch on the pistol to show the descendants of the Garifuna why you should support the ruling regime for another 5 years. You see, we finally acknowledge you in a major way. We're going to have the conference later this year too. Because we know that many people would have forgotten the discussion when the offer was made by Eustace to reconnect the Garifuna with their heritage in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in such a significant way that they may become investors in the development of this society. It was not an idea that found favor with them at the time, the ULP. But now they wanted to find favor because it's an election year. It's an election year. There are issues that we don't want to talk about because it doesn't suit their pride and purposes at this juncture in the electoral process. What is the proportion of Vincentians working at Sandals to the proportion of people from the Dominican Republic in particular at Sandals? What is it today as compared to what it was intended to be, or the impression we got? Yes, there's been progress made by Sandals' presence. But Sandals claimed to have been training Vincentians so that they can manage the affairs. They can work in different sections. We ask today, what is the proportion of Vincentians in respect of the total staff at Sandals in Buchanan? Because that is a critical issue. It's easy to get up on National Heroes Day and, as the old people say, pump a set. Scrambling through a set of papers to fashion your interpretation of the history of this country. But that history, which suggests a commitment to struggle to the realization of genuine independence, has been stymied in many respects by the system of governance that we have going on in this country. An eagerness to show oneself as the leader of revolutions allowed for an agreement of sorts, apparently, with the unions, public sector unions, to allow people within the public service to take the plunge into national politics and not lose their jobs. When the first case was brought by the unions, they were told it was aspirational. It was not an agreement. So suddenly, the people in the unions didn't have enough of an understanding of what they were doing when they were signing them. When they put it in there, they knew why they were putting it. But suddenly, when the time came for its application, they were told what again? It was aspirational. It's their continued battle and struggle as genuine unions looking after their membership as compared to the other mamagaing organizations that posing as unions. That they got it implemented. We're talking about fairness. Yesterday, a National Heroes Day. Fairness and justice. And what is right. And we say if the people feel that they have title to Baliso, let them bring it. Let them bring it. Marcus the Freitas went to court to get appropriate compensation for his property. They recognize, as Marcus said himself, I told them what I wanted in exchange. I didn't necessarily want any settlement. But they decided they wanted to buy it. He still ain't finished get paid yet. He ain't get paid in full yet. After more than 20 years. So how dare you stand and suggest that the concept of fairness somehow should be invoked in discussing issues of national importance when it's been sanctioned. When it's been sanctioned, had to go to court to get fairness with regard to the property being acquired by a government. And the government cannot find space in 2 decades to find the resources to pay him for his property. The concept of fairness must apply across the board. It cannot be inhibited by the politics of those who are in charge. We have to be consistent. We want to suggest that we should be completely independent. But many Vincentians did not trust our system. And it's one of the reasons that they want to this day to maintain the Privy Council as their last court of appeal. Because they understood what happened in the case of James Mitchell and the Otley Hall inquiry. There's no apparent compunction on the part of those who hold the reins of power to explain to the people of this nation how much money we spent on that Otley Hall inquiry. Explain to the nation why it ended once James Mitchell took his time and money to clear his name. To clear his name. Nobody has apologized to James Mitchell and his family. Nobody has apologized to him and his family for the years of struggle to try to get his name cleared because of a report, an interim report, that sought to put a millstone around his neck. What fairness? What fairness are we talking about? How suddenly we are talking about heroism on National Heroes Day, when we have sought to pull down those who helped to build the country. That a prime minister, in his very first independence address, can ignore 17 and a half years of this nation's history. What authority do you then have to come and talk about the history of the country? When the first opportunity you got, you went back to talk about people who may very well be deemed national heroes to the development of this country. But you jump over 17 and a half years to make a link with yourself and Milton Ketu. Our children listening to yesterday's speech must have an understanding of how decidedly prejudicial the politics of this country has become. We didn't want to talk about Annim Eustace yesterday because he was from the NDP. And we chose to ignore his reaching out to the Garifuna. We jumping over that too, just like we jump over 17 and a half years of governance of this country. How is it possible for us to stand and make declarations about the history of a country that does not appear to legitimize the contributions of Africans? Talking of African bodies, the number of African bodies brought here, the number of African bodies carried there, the number of African bodies. How did the Garifuna start? What is Garifuna? Did it not engage the Kalinago and those same African bodies? Did it not? As Ben Johannes says, you didn't get your skin color by remote osmosis. What were the complexion of the Garifuna as opposed to the Kalinago? But we only entered the discourse as African bodies being brought in slavery. Were there African bodies in St. Vincent before the official transfer of slaves? And were those African bodies not engaging in relations with the Kalinago? If Garifuna started in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who were the people who gave birth to it? One has to understand their friends and understand clearly the reference by psychologists to the games people play. Remember Eric Fromm? The games people play. The suggestion in life and the sociological viewpoint is that life is about playing games. Things are not always what they seem. And people are not always what they present at face value. And that is why we keep asking people, asking our Vincentian people to pay closer attention to what is being said and done in the country, and understanding the politics, understanding the gamesmanship that is taking place in politics. The undue haste to patch roads all across the country now is to ensure that by election time, everybody driving on suddenly smooth roads. But think of how many times certain areas had been repaired in your communities. And within a year to a year and a half, the holes reopened in exactly the same spots that they were before. Think of it. Nobody came to you and told you that would give you some respite in terms of the cost of parts for your vehicles. There are areas where the roads are not even suitable for donkey carts and they don't have much of those anymore. Far less for the expensive vehicles that you are buying. We have watched the growth of criminal activity in our country. And then we have some namby-pamby explanations for how we have come to that stage. But we have to look good because elections come in. We continue to ignore the complaints of Vincentians about the lack of appropriate medication at the hospital. And our response is we will build a bigger one. We will build a bigger one. So they're ignoring the complaints of the same electorate about what ails them in respect of the current healthcare system that we have. We boast when we get a new piece of equipment. Even though we left one sensitive equipment in the Victoria Park in a heated container for several months. We don't want to discuss that. We expect it to function very good afterwards. Or you can buy a new one. We're not really dealing with the substantive issues, you know. We're dealing with building images, getting people to forget the core issue and have them focus on the peripheral. The more substantive issue is that people cannot get the appropriate medication after they have been diagnosed. Your response is you can build a bigger hospital. That's not what people were asking for. If you get a bigger hospital, that's fine, but that's not what they were asking. They were asking for greater attention to be paid to the nuances of the existing healthcare system. Remember when Seth Mackey was Minister of Health? He boasted of how many international offshore medical schools wanted to come to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They gave us the impression that we were so good in terms of healthcare delivery that schools were coming and applying to establish themselves in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Nobody has explained to us officially how the school that was using the former teachers' college just upped and left. And then we heard about some cadavers that they were using in their teaching practice were left in another building someplace else. Nobody responded to that. So the emphasis is on what we want to tell you, what we want you to focus attention on. You don't tell us as the electorate where you think we should be focusing on. You're not in charge. And that is the problem. That is the problem. The electorate is not in charge. the electorate is not allowed to do things. It's amazing that you're looking now on television and see who is leading the charge against the shenanigans of the current president. The people. The people. Holding their people to account. Holding their elected officials to account. So much so that the elected officials don't even want to meet their people. Here, we were promised a consultative democracy. Gonzalez is known for having written extensively on the pitfalls of the Constitution, systems of governance in the Anglophone or English-speaking Caribbean. He had a list of about 10 principles that needed urgent change. The first one was about prime ministerial dominance, or prime ministerial governance, the power of the prime minister. And his recommendation has always been to reduce the powers of the prime minister. Well, while you can do major changes in the Constitution, and so it becomes part and parcel of the laws of the country, nothing prevents you to show good intentions by reducing those powers yourself. But instead, over the last 24 odd years, what we have gotten is an entrenchment of that prime ministerial dominance. It appears as though nothing happens in the country in terms of governance unless the prime minister has his say. Remember, we complained very early that even when an act was being piloted by a particular ministry and minister in Parliament, when that person is finished speaking, the prime minister comes after in support and spends 3 to 4 times, takes 3 to 4 times the amount of time that individual did in their piloting to explain what was the intention. At the end of the day, people want to know who was really piloting the act or the bill. We've always seen prime ministerial dominance in almost every aspect of government in the country. Now we have an understanding of prime in prime minister means first. First, you have an understanding of why that was said. So there's been no real effort to show by good example a commitment to that same challenge that he's been writing about for years in his political analyses. To lessen prime ministerial governance in the way things are done. Remember? We were given the impression that there would have been, in the first 5 years, attention paid to the development of governance in communities around the country. We thought we'd have had the introduction of local government. That hasn't happened. That hasn't happened. We thought we'd have had a consultative democracy. We thought we would have had integrity legislation. We thought we would have had their own commitment to the development of an ombudsman. Instead, 20 odd years after the bridge over troubled water, we come to deal with the award of the contract for the new hospital. We bypassed the tenders board again, as though we were celebrating some anniversary of what we did in the very first year in office. Whereas, in the first instance, Julian Francis said it was the urgency. And if such urgency occurred, he would have done the same thing. But Julian wasn't involved in this one. But who made the decision? And what was the urgency of bypassing the tenders board for the award of the contract for the new hospital? What was the sense of urgency? There has not been any evidence, if you engage in your critical analysis, of any major move towards genuine inclusion in this country. It is as if the ruling regime has taken on board the statement made by one of its leaders, who happened to have been a religious person, an avowed Christian, making a statement at the political party's convention that we must own the jobs too. Those words coming from a Christian whose fundamental ethos is love and brotherhood. We must own the jobs too, so only one set of people must be the beneficiaries, first and foremost, of anything that is available. That is not building nationhood. You cannot build nationhood afterwards and say it's for all of we. But when a crisis hits, suddenly it's for all of we. That's the problem the government is having in the Grenadines, in the rebuilding process. The people want involvement, but there is at the same time an election pending. And so it's very difficult to distinguish the kind of promotion being given by the government to the work it is doing in the Grenadines for the people of the Grenadines, while the people of the Grenadines are saying, but we were doing things for ourselves all the time. But if you're coming to assist us, allow us to retain our dignity, our self-respect, because we can rebuild our place if we get the appropriate materials. So there may well be an additional reason for the government wanting to be in the Grenadines at this particular juncture ahead of a pending elections. That is how the system works. Let us be honest. Although honesty does not seem to be a feature of Vincentian politics. So it is we doing it for them, as though the people not accustomed to doing things for themselves. They live their lives understanding the pressure imposed on them by the way the system works in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They already have to pay to transport their goods. Now Vincentians can simply go and take their things off the wharf. Grenadine people have to transship, which is an additional cost. And then we refer to the people of the Grenadines as them down there. They don't like us. They don't like us. But how they gonna like you if you decided at one point that it was convenient to put what we call a departure tax on them, in addition to everything that they were already paying. So the average Vincentian does not have a grasp at talking about people born and bred on St. Vincent as opposed to the Grenadines. Many Vincentians, in that sense, that narrow sense, do not have an understanding and an appreciation of the daily experiences of the peoples of the Grenadines. And rather than seek to understand it and understand that they are part of the nation, they turn around and say, them down there. They don't like us. I mean, they're different people. Those are the conversations that we have. And those are the conversations facilitated by too many agencies, including the media. We're not, by any stretch of the imagination, a united people. And we've become more divided as a nation, a small nation of 110,000 people, become much more divided in the last 24 years than in the history of the country. Much more divided. But we pat ourselves on the back as a ruling regime and essentially say to the nation, we have taken you forward. Not the nation has taken itself forward. The political leadership of the last 24 years has taken the nation forward. We have done this for you. We have done that for you. We didn't ask you if you want to be part of it. We just assume that once they elect us, you tell us yes. We don't engage you in any sort of meaningful consultation. We know the answer of everything we want to do. But that is why at the end of the day, we appear fearful of revealing the findings of the poverty assessment report of 2018. Imagine that all of the previous poverty assessment reports have been open to the public. And suddenly, one comes out on the poverty assessment of 2018. And the government of the day comes to the public after people ask for it and leak parts of it, that we are not satisfied with the way in which the assessment was done. Kind of suggesting that if we didn't like how it was done, we can't like the results. So they have decided for you, and for the very first time, for all the boasts that we have been making about changing the nature of this country by eliminating poverty, we are not going to let you see the progress made or the lack thereof, because we don't think that we should make that available, because we don't like how it was done. Do you like how it was done every time before? What were the differences in the approach under your administration? Remember, this is the assessment of 2018, you know. You're already 17 years in office. And the project of assessing progress or regression with regard to poverty alleviation is in your control. And then you get the results, and you unilaterally decide that we don't like how it was undertaken without telling us the results. So the electorate is left to its own interpretation that there must be something about the results that is so bothersome to you that you're not going to release it. And you're going to tell the nation instead, when they find out that you're not releasing it, that we're not releasing it because we think it was inappropriately done. For the first time, we didn't like how it was done. And the electorate is supposed to simply accept that. People, open your eyes and your ears. Does that make sense to you? Does it make sense to you? But that is our reality, isn't it? Why don't you want the people to know whether there were higher levels of poverty and higher levels of indigence found when the survey was done than you were telling them was your reality? Because you've been the one marketing the progress that you believe you are making by saying that you give a little additional support to pensioners, to this, to that. You've been the one boasting of the impact of that on those people. But the survey would have had those people responding as to how those very things would have met their needs or not meet their needs. But you don't want them to know. So at the end of the day, dear friends, the mumbo jumbo that we got about national heroism. And remember, in 2012, we said that the mechanisms were in place, to create new national heroes. Just a matter of time, very quickly. The next time we heard that talk was 6 years later, 2018. Understand? So is it or is it not a form of political mamagism? And do we believe that there is some kind of education revolution that has enlightened our people, made them more capable of applying their critical thinking skills, such that they should be able to buy into that nonsense? We can use platforms to be eloquent, to confuffle people's minds, and make them believe that everything you say is true. Over the last several weeks, for example, one article after the other from the Unity Labour Party in the newspapers on the weekend suggests how well they have done for you. They haven't done it with you, they have done it for you. But they didn't do any sort of consultation with you with regard to where you're going. And that's why we tried both Carlos James and Saboto Caesar for daring to go up to North Leeward when the people were protesting the quarry and tell the people that that was the first consultation. And the people had to throw it back in their face and say, you're only here because we protested. There was no planned series of consultations. How many consultations have taken place since that first one that they said was their first one? How many? How many consultations? And so we have a society that is decidedly fractious, broken up. But it seemed appropriate to use National Heroes Day in an election year to try to get our people distracted distracted from the realities on the ground today, where people are fed up. Fed up of hearing the same old, same old. And importantly, they're fed up of hearing one voice. One voice speaking for the rest. One voice. And that one voice may very well end up being the undoing of the party. Some years ago, an individual made a point in another institution at a regional level. I make it so I could break it. And one wonders if that is where we are at the level of governance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines today. My story, not necessarily yours, but my story, and I am telling you that is our story. But we keep pinch hitting. There's a sense in which certain issues are taken. And we boast of successes, we don't mention failures. And when people are looking for the benefits of those successes, they become very, very worried. Look at this year's budget. Compare it to the budget of 2020. Compare it to the budget of 2015. Compare it to the budget of 2010. Check and see for yourself. Check and see for yourself how those budgets differ from the years immediately before them. So check 2024, 23. Check 2019, 2018. You couldn't release the results of poverty assessment report if they were negative. The report for 2018, you couldn't reveal that in 2019 because it would have had implications for the elections of 2020. Check the budget. 2015, compare it with 2014, 2013. 2010, compared to the budgets of 2009 and 2008. And you'll see how the election year packages for the budget are so distinctly different from the years leading up to them. So suddenly, resources are found for all sorts of things. Knowing, or believing at least, that the Vincentian electorate will not be paying enough attention to realize that we will not putting resources in certain places at a certain time. But when the election is coming near, we believe that once people get something in their hand, as close to the election day as possible, they're more likely to vote because the short-term benefit will impact their voting patterns. That's why envelopes are put under your doors close to elections. That's why. Because they believe that as a nation, even though we talk about an education revolution, that has not yet impacted our political behavior. So we've continued to systematically endorse and further entrench an archaic political culture that allows people to be driven by what they get now as close to the voting as possible, and that will influence them. If we believe that is how we're working, then we are also admitting that our education revolution, so-called, has failed. That's what we are saying. And if you can come on National Heroes Day and befuddle and confuse the nation by much of what was stated on the political platform that was offered on that day to speak to the nation, then you have an understanding of how we try to influence people. That's why we ask, where is the contract with civil society? Where is it? It has suddenly disappeared because it served its usefulness in 2001. By 2005, you were not hearing of the concept of the contract with civil society. By 2005, you were not hearing about the cross-country road. Understand the process and understand why it was necessary to explain the hurt of the loss. The one loss. I can't say that. Did say on National Heroes Day, all the other victories have won. Never been defeated. Except that one time. When the nation, not a political party, the nation rejected what you presented to them as a new constitution. They rejected it because they understood it. And they understood its implications for them as a people. So they're not entirely stupid. And so, from the vantage point of the leader of government, it must be a bother to you that you lost the majority of the votes in the last election. And don't pamper anybody into believing that because your people were so sure of victory that they say that. You had announced that you were doing so well in the Grenadines that you may split their votes. At the end of the day, that wasn't the case. You lost the popular vote because of your loss in popularity. The people of the country are of an understanding that we have a one-man government. A one-man government. That is important. They recognize that all that is being said about democratic principles, about consultative democracy, all of those are mere fanciful terms that mean nothing in practice because they're not being implemented. One of the challenges we recognize is that we continue to behave as though the international scenario is fixed. The shenanigans that are taking place in the global environment must hold and occupy our attention. How we respond to it is important. CARICOM itself took too long to understand the possible consequences of a change in government at the US level. Now, after merely 2 months, there's a better understanding as to what kind of international community and what type of economic and political blocks are being configured and reconfigured at the present time. Where is the Caribbean? Where is the Caribbean? Only after the fact, the adhocratic approach of CARICOM, the adhocratic approach of CARICOM leaders is consistent with what we see in every one of our respective Caribbean countries. We are not forward thinking. We are not forward looking. We are reactive. We are reactive to what is happening in the international community. So those progressives who have moved on to positions of governance have given the lie to all that they were saying when they were in the progressive movement as leaders. They forgot all that they taught us. They forgot the fundamentals of what they were telling us should be done. Because once they have swiveled in the big chair, the giddiness has very quickly allowed the positions of dominance, their perceived positions of power, to dominate their thinking and their actions. We as a Caribbean find ourselves in a political conundrum that impacts our economic development strategies, impacts the way we impose laws and develop laws, impacts our general behavior. We become little king tuts, with everybody competing essentially for some sort of benevolent dictatorship amongst the electorate. That is the reality that our people have to confront. That is what has happened to us as a people. And we have an understanding, or have to develop an understanding of are we or are we not committed to studying what is happening at our governance level and to determine whether or not there is a need for change, and how do we make that change, and importantly, how do we insert ourselves as members of the electorate into that process of change, such that we are forever involved in the consultative process and the democratization of our respective societies to redound unto the benefit of all of us, not just some of us. Enough said. You've been listening to another edition of Nice Radio's Callaloo presentation, Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative, and yes, certainly controversial, socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard on Nice Radio on Saturdays at 6 p.m., repeated on Sundays at 9 p.m. Catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info. You can also catch us on Facebook and YouTube. I am, of course,